everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're taking a look at the world of robotaxis.
Oh, yeah.
Using this really fascinating MIT Technology Review article titled, What's Next for Robotaxis in 2024?
Okay.
Remember all that hype around robotaxis a while back?
I do.
It seemed like they were going to be everywhere, right?
Yeah, it did. It really did.
But things haven't quite gone according to plan.
Yeah, no.
So this deep dive, we're going to try to figure out what's going on in the robotaxi world.
Okay.
What are some of the challenges they're facing, and what does the future hold for these driverless cars?
Sounds good.
Okay, so let's start with a pretty major turning point for the industry.
Mm-hmm.
The Cruise incident back in October of 2023.
Right.
A Cruise robotaxi was involved in a serious accident in San Francisco.
Yeah.
And thankfully, the victims survived.
That's good.
But their injuries were serious.
Yeah.
And it led to Cruise suspending their operations in California.
Mm-hmm.
It also, of course, triggered an investigation by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration.
Right. And it was kind of a big blow to the industry, raising questions about safety, regulation, public trust.
Yeah, definitely a setback.
You know, I think it makes sense that people would be a little hesitant to jump into a driverless car after something like that happens.
Yeah.
So are there any companies still operating robotaxis even after this incident?
Some are.
Oh.
Waymo, for example, is still running fleets in a few cities.
Okay.
And they're even operating in parts of San Francisco, but only with a safety driver behind the wheel, for now at least.
Okay, so safety drivers are still a thing.
Yeah, for now.
So what would you say is the biggest obstacle for robotaxis right now? Is it just about, regaining public trust after an accident like that? Or are there other factors in play?
Well, regaining public trust it's huge.
Right.
But there's also the financial hurdle.
Oh.
These companies have received billions in investments.
Wow.
And yet, robotaxis still haven't turned a profit.
Really? Why is that?
Well, it comes down to the technology.
These cars are packed with expensive equipment, things like LiDAR,
Right.
radar, cameras, and super complex software systems that all need constant upkeep and maintenance.
Okay, so you've got all this expensive stuff in the car, constantly needing to be fixed, updated.
Right.
And so each ride must cost a lot of money to actually provide, right?
Yeah, and right now, each ride costs more to provide than it makes in revenue.
Wow.
So you can see why investors might be getting a little nervous.
Yeah, definitely. So, are we even at a point where the technology is ready?
Well, that's where it gets interesting.
Okay.
We've seen some amazing progress in autonomous driving, but the systems still have their limitations.
Like what?
Well, for one, they still rely on very expensive hardware to work reliably.
Okay.
And that, of course, contributes to the high costs we were just talking about.
Right.
And there's also still a need for human oversight in a lot of cases, which, again, adds to the cost.
So it's not quite as simple as just letting the car drive itself everywhere?
No, not yet. There's this MIT professor, Missy Cummings, and she's the director of the Humans in Autonomy Lab.
Okay.
And she believes that we need a really major technological breakthrough.
Yeah.
To really make robotaxis feasible for widespread use.
Oh, wow. Okay. So even if we solve the cost and the tech problems, how easy is it to make these systems work everywhere?
Well, scaling is a big challenge.
Okay.
Even the companies that are considered successful, like Waymo,
Yeah.
they're still operating in very limited areas,
Okay.
adapting these systems to new environments, different road conditions, traffic patterns, different types of vehicles even.
Yeah.
It's a really, really complex undertaking.
So it's not just about drawing a bigger circle on a map and saying, okay, now we can operate here.
Oh, definitely not.
Okay.
Even going from, let's say, San Francisco to Austin,
Yeah.
that would require a ton of adjustments to the software and mapping data for these companies.
Okay, so let's zoom out a little bit.
Right.
We've been mostly talking about what's happening in the U.S., but what about the global landscape?
Sure.
Are other countries ahead of the game?
It's kind of a mixed bag.
Okay.
China, their development is roughly on par with what we're seeing in the U.S.
Okay.
They have pilot programs and robotaxis operating in some areas,
Okay.
but they're facing very similar challenges related to cost and scaling.
Okay, so everybody's kind of in the same boat.
Pretty much, yeah.
Are there any regions showing a lot of interest in robotaxis?
The Middle East is becoming a really interesting player.
Okay.
So Saudi Arabia recently invested like $100 million in Pony.ai,
Wow.
which is a Chinese robotaxi startup.
Okay.
And you've got Dubai and Abu Dhabi, who are trying to position themselves as hubs for driverless vehicle technology.
Okay, so they're really trying to get ahead of the curve.
Yeah, they are.
What about Europe?
Europe's been a little more cautious.
Okay.
Mostly they're doing small-scale trials and tests, but they've been much slower to allow robotaxis on public roads.
Okay, so they're taking a wait-and-see approach.
I think that's fair to say.
So, we talked about the cruise incident earlier
Well,
and how that really shook public trust.
yeah.
What are these companies doing to reassure the public?
Well, transparency and safety are really key.
Okay.
You've got groups like Advocates for Highway and Auto Safety.
Hmm.
They're pushing for companies to release more data about how their vehicles operate, their safety records.
So more transparency in general.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, are the companies being open about their data?
Well, that's the thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Some companies have been hesitant to share. They cite trade secrets.
Okay.
And there were actually some federal bills proposed last year that would shielded some safety data from the public.
Wow. Okay. So, it seems like the future of robotaxis depends on more than just the technology itself, right?
Well, absolutely.
Yeah.
Building public trust, clear safety regulations, that's all just as important.
Okay, so we've got this really complex puzzle with a lot of moving pieces here. So with all of that in mind, what do you think the future holds? Will robotaxis eventually become like the way we get around?
It's the million-dollar question.
It is.
I mean, the potential's there, but the hurdles are real.
So it's not a given that robotaxis are going to take over the world.
Oh, no, not at all.
Okay.
It's going to depend on technology, economics, regulations, public acceptance. It's complicated.
Yeah, so it's more than just building a better robot driver.
Right.
It's about building a system that actually works in our world.
Exactly.
Addresses safety concerns and really, gets people on board.
It's going to take collaboration between researchers, engineers, policymakers, the public, everybody, really.
It's a group effort.
It is.
Okay, so we've talked about the challenges.
Right.
But, there must be some companies out there pushing forward.
Oh, yeah.
Despite all of this, what should our listeners be aware of in terms of new developments?
Well, one trend we're seeing is the involvement of these big established automakers. So like General Motors, they're heavily invested in Cruise.
Okay.
And Ford has partnered with Argo AI to develop their own self-driving technology.
Okay, so it's not just these little startups anymore.
No.
The big players are jumping in.
They're recognizing the potential.
Yeah.
And they're bringing their manufacturing expertise and resources to the table.
Okay, so they don't want to get left behind if this takes off.
Exactly. The stakes are high.
They are.
And nobody wants to be left in the dust.
We're also seeing companies that are focusing on really specific applications for robotaxis.
Right.
So what's happening there?
So instead of trying to make a robotaxi that does everything, they're kind of carving out these niches.
Okay.
A good example is Nuro. They're developing autonomous delivery vehicles.
Okay.
So their vehicles are specifically designed to transport goods, not people.
So they're kind of sidestepping all that passenger safety stuff.
Exactly.
And focusing on a market that's already booming.
Exactly. They're not worried about passenger comfort. They can really optimize for efficiency and cost effectiveness.
Okay, so it's interesting to see all this diversification, different models emerging.
Yeah.
But it's not just about the companies themselves, is it?
Yep.
Regulations play a huge role too, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So how does that play out?
Well, the rules for these autonomous vehicles, they change all over the place. Even within the U.S., different states have totally different approaches.
Oh, wow.
So it creates this really complicated web of regulations.
Yeah.
And it's super challenging for companies that are trying to operate in multiple places.
So you can't just build a great robotaxi and then just go everywhere with it.
Nope, not at all.
Are there any countries that are doing a good job with their regulations?
Well, China is an interesting example.
Okay.
They're doing these things called regulatory sandboxes.
Okay.
Which are basically controlled areas where companies can test out their technologies in real-world environments.
Okay.
But they don't have to deal with all the regular regulations.
So it's like a testing ground for robotaxis.
Yes.
Where they can collect data, refine the systems in a safe and controlled way.
Exactly.
So that seems like a smart approach. Right.
Yeah, it allows them to innovate while making sure things are still safe.
And it probably attracts investment,
That's
right?
for sure.
So it seems like China is positioning itself as a leader in this space?
We are.
How is the U.S. responding?
Well, we've been traditionally more cautious,
Okay.
really prioritizing safety and regulation.
Yeah.
But there's this growing awareness that maybe we need to be a bit more proactive
Okay.
if we want to stay competitive.
So are we seeing a shift towards a more hands-on approach to fostering innovation in the U.S.?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
There's this growing sense that we need to balance safety with progress.
Right. Yeah.
We can't just stifle innovation with a ton of regulations,
Yeah.
but we also can't compromise on safety.
Right. It's a delicate balance.
It really is.
Okay, so we've talked about the technology, the companies, the regulations.
Yep.
But let's shift gears for a moment and think about our listeners.
Sure.
What can they do to stay informed about this stuff?
Well, luckily, there's tons of resources out there.
Okay, good.
If you want to learn more about robotaxis and autonomous vehicles.
Like what?
Oh, there's amazing articles, videos, even podcasts.
Well, I mean, our listeners are on the right track.
Of course.
By listening to the deep dive.
Exactly.
But there's always more to learn.
Oh, absolutely. Even for the most hardcore tech enthusiasts.
Yeah.
There's always something new.
Okay, so what would you say to our listeners?
I would say stay curious, ask questions, and talk about this stuff with other people.
Okay, so stay engaged. And who knows, maybe someday soon you'll be hailing a robotaxi yourself.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
And experiencing this firsthand.
That would be a deep dive.
It would be a very literal deep dive.
For sure.
Okay. We've covered a lot of ground. I think it's time to step back and consider some of the broader implications.
Yeah.
So what does a world with robotaxis everywhere actually look like?
Right.
What are the potential benefits and challenges for society as a whole?
Lots to think about there.
There is. So let's give our listeners a minute to process what we've discussed so far.
Sounds good.
And we'll pick up this conversation in just a bit.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is fascinating to think about,
Yeah.
how much could change if these things become like a normal part of life.
Yeah, like imagine no more fighting for parking.
Right.
No more stress in rush hour traffic.
Exactly.
But then again, there's this whole trust issue.
Yeah.
Like trusting a machine to drive you around, especially after
that cruise accident.
Yeah, that really did kind of bring those safety concerns front and center, didn't it?
It did. It made people stop and think.
Yeah.
Like, is this technology really ready?
Yeah. Before that, it felt like there was so much hype. It felt like they were just right around the corner.
Right, like inevitable.
Yeah.
But I think that accident was a reality check for a lot of people.
Yeah.
It showed that, there's still things to figure out.
Right.
Both with the technology itself and with the rules around it.
It's kind of like, the early days of aviation when there were all those accidents,
right,
as they were figuring out how to make airplanes safe.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Do you think robotaxis are going through something similar?
I think so. Yeah. There's definitely a learning curve.
Yeah.
And like any new technology, there can be bumps in the road.
Right.
The key is to learn from those and make things better.
So we're not giving up on robotaxis just yet?
No, not at all.
Okay.
I think we're still in those early stages.
Right.
And the potential benefits, they're huge.
Yeah.
I think that with more research and development and careful planning, we can get there.
Okay, so let's say we do figure out the technology. We address all the safety concerns.
Right.
How do we convince people that it's actually safe to ride in a car without a human driver?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
And it goes beyond just safety statistics.
Okay.
It's about building trust, being transparent.
Yeah.
Companies need to be upfront about what the technology can and can't do.
Right.
And they need to share data about how safe their vehicles are.
So more transparency from the companies.
Yes.
More education for the public.
Exactly.
Maybe even some opportunities for people to try out these robotaxis in a safe environment.
That's a good idea.
So they can see for themselves how it works.
Yeah, like a test drive to get people comfortable.
Okay, so let's just imagine for a second.
Okay.
We've solved all the tech challenges. Safety concerns are addressed. Everyone's on board. They trust the technology.
Right.
What does that world look like?
Well, I think you'd see cities with a lot less traffic.
Okay.
Fewer parking lots. And it'd be easier for people who can't drive to get around.
Okay, so people with disabilities, the elderly.
Exactly. It could be really transformative.
It sounds amazing, almost utopian.
It does.
But are there any downsides?
Of course, there's always downsides.
Right.
One big one is jobs.
Oh, yeah.
If robotaxis replace human drivers, what happens to all those people?
That's a really good point.
And it's not just taxi drivers.
Yeah.
We're talking truck drivers, delivery drivers, bus drivers, a lot of people.
Right. So this is going to require some really careful thought.
Ew.
Maybe some retraining programs, new job opportunities.
Definitely. And we may even need to rethink things like social safety nets.
So it's about more than just replacing drivers with robots.
It is.
It's about rethinking how our entire transportation system works.
Exactly. We need to make sure everyone benefits.
So it's a big task.
It is.
But it's a challenge worth taking on, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, if we do it right.
Yeah.
This technology could make transportation more efficient, more fair, more sustainable.
I hope you're right.
Me too.
Okay, so let's come back to the present for a minute.
Okay.
What's happening right now that our listeners should know about?
Well, even with that setback from the cruise incident, there's still a lot of activity.
Okay.
Companies are working on their technology, trying new things.
Okay.
And we're seeing some interesting partnerships forming.
Can you give us some specific examples?
Sure. So one big trend is that traditional car companies are getting more involved.
Okay.
Like General Motors has a huge stake in Cruise.
Right.
And Ford has partnered with Argo AI to develop their own self-driving tech.
So it's not just those tech startups anymore.
Nope.
The big guys are getting in the game.
They see the potential.
Yeah.
And they have the resources to really make a difference.
Makes sense. They don't want to miss out.
Exactly. The stakes are high.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to be left behind.
We're also seeing these specialized robotaxi companies popping up.
We are.
What's going on there?
So instead of trying to build a robotaxi that does everything,
Right.
they're focusing on specific things. Like Neuro is all about self-driving delivery vehicles.
Okay, so just delivery, not people.
Right, just goods.
Okay.
So they're sidestepping that whole passenger safety issue.
Yeah.
And focusing on a market that's already huge.
Right. Online shopping, delivery services, all that.
Exactly.
It's smart.
It is.
And they can design those vehicles for maximum efficiency.
Exactly. They don't have to worry about things like passenger comfort.
Right.
So it's all about speed and cost effectiveness.
So the industry is getting more diverse, more specialized.
It is.
It's kind of like natural selection, right?
Yeah, I like that analogy.
The best models will survive.
Right, the ones that work.
Okay. But it's not just about the companies themselves. Yeah. Regulations are a big part of this too, right?
Huge.
So how are those playing out?
Well, the rules for autonomous vehicles are different everywhere you go.
Mm-hmm.
Even within the U.S., different states have different approaches.
Wow. Okay.
So it's this really complicated patchwork. That makes it hard for companies to operate in multiple places.
So you can't just build great robotaxi and then take it anywhere.
Nope, not at all.
Are there any countries that are doing regulations well?
Well, China's an interesting case.
Okay.
They're doing these things called regulatory sandboxes.
Right. We talked about those.
Yeah, basically they're setting up these controlled areas
Yeah.
where companies can test their tech in real-world settings.
But without all the usual red tape.
Exactly.
So it's like a testing ground for innovation.
It is.
While still keeping things safe.
Right. It's a smart strategy.
It is. And it probably attracts a lot of investment.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So China's really positioning themselves as a leader in this space.
They are.
What's the U.S. doing to keep up?
Well, we've traditionally taken a more cautious approach.
Okay.
You know, safety and regulation first.
Mm-hmm.
But people are starting to realize that we need to be more proactive
Okay.
if we want to stay competitive.
So we might see a shift in the U.S. towards more support for innovation?
I think that's very likely.
Okay, so it's a balancing act. Safety versus progress.
Exactly, finding that sweet spot.
And the stakes are high.
They are.
This could have a huge impact on the economy.
Absolutely. And on global leadership in this whole field.
Right. It's about more than just robotaxis.
It is. It's about artificial intelligence, autonomous systems, the future, really.
Okay, well, we've covered a lot.
We have.
But let's bring it back to our listeners for a second.
Okay.
What can they do to stay informed about all of this?
Well, there's a ton of great resources out there.
Like what?
Articles, videos, even some great podcasts.
Well, our listeners are already ahead of the game.
Of course.
By listening to the deep dive.
Exactly.
But there's always more to learn.
Oh, absolutely.
So what would you say to our listeners?
Stay curious, ask questions, talk to people about this stuff.
So stay engaged.
Exactly.
And who knows, maybe one day you'll be hailing a robotaxi yourself.
That'd be cool.
Yeah, and you'll be experiencing all of this firsthand.
That would be a real deep dive.
A very literal one.
For sure.
Yeah. Okay, so we've explored a lot.
Yeah.
Time for a little reflection.
This is good.
What do you think? 10 years from now, what does the robotaxi world look like?
10 years, huh? That's a tough one.
Yeah.
It's hard to predict with technology like this.
Right.
But I think we'll see a much more developed robotaxi ecosystem.
Okay, so they'll be more integrated into our world?
Yeah, but I don't think it'll be everywhere.
Okay.
Some cities will embrace it fully.
Yeah.
Others will be more hesitant.
So we might see a kind of robotaxi divide.
Yeah, I think that's likely.
Between the early adopters and those who are slower to change.
Exactly.
And that'll be influenced by regulations, infrastructure.
Right. And public opinion.
Right, so it's not just about the technology.
It's not.
It's about all these other factors.
Absolutely. It's a complex system.
It is. It's a fascinating puzzle.
It is.
Well, I think that's a good place to leave it for now.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of robotaxis.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep your minds open and your curiosity alive.
And don't forget to buckle up for the ride.
Yeah, that uneven adoption, that's an interesting point.
Yeah.
It's easy to think that, robotaxis are just going to be everywhere.
Right.
But like you said, it'll probably be more gradual.
I think so.
With some areas adopting them faster than others.
Yeah, and I think that could actually be a good thing in a way.
Oh, how so?
Well, it lets us see how they work in different situations.
Okay.
Different cities, different environments.
Right.
We can learn from the places that are early adopters.
Oh, so it's kind of like a real-world experiment.
Yeah, exactly.
And we can see what works and what doesn't.
Right, and then adjust accordingly.
So instead of this, one-size-fits-all approach,
yes,
we might see different models for different places.
Exactly, and that flexibility is really important.
Okay.
Because every city has its own unique needs and challenges.
Right. What works in San Francisco might not work in, say, Atlanta.
Yeah. Exactly. A sprawling suburban area versus a dense urban environment.
Yeah, so it's not just about the technology.
Right.
It's about how it fits into the existing infrastructure.
And the planning and policy decisions that go along with that.
Right, so this is where urban planning and policy come into play.
Absolutely. It's a crucial part of the equation.
So it's not just about the engineers building the robots.
It's bigger than that.
It's about everyone working together.
Yeah, we need to have a real conversation about this.
Okay.
Involving policymakers, city planners, transportation experts, and of course the public.
So it's a collaborative effort.
It has to be.
We need to figure out how this technology can best serve our communities.
Exactly. And that means asking the right questions.
Like what?
Well, how can robotaxis make our cities safer?
Okay.
More accessible? More sustainable?
Those are big questions.
They are, and we need to make sure this technology benefits everyone.
Right, not just a select few.
Exactly. It's about equity and inclusion.
Okay, so we've got these big picture questions. But let's come back down to earth for a minute.
Okay.
What are some of the challenges the industry's facing right now?
Well, besides the tech stuff, which is ongoing,
yeah,
cost is a big one.
Okay, right. Because right now, robotaxis are still pretty expensive.
They are, much more so than traditional taxis or ride-sharing services.
So even if the technology works perfectly, the price could be a barrier.
It could, for a lot of people.
So what are companies doing about that?
Well, they're working on making the technology cheaper.
Okay.
Things like sensors, software, maintenance, all that.
Right.
And they're also exploring different business models.
Like what?
Things like ride-sharing, subscription services.
So finding ways to make it more affordable for people to actually use.
Exactly. There's a lot of innovation happening in that area.
Okay, so lots of experimentation going on. It'll be interesting to see what they come up with.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so we've talked about the impact on cities, transportation systems.
Right.
What about the broader societal implications?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
And I think we're really just starting to scratch the surface there.
Okay.
This technology could disrupt a lot of things.
Like what?
Well, obviously the transportation industry, but also the job market,
Right.
insurance, even our social interactions.
Wow, it's like a ripple effect.
It is. One change can lead to a whole bunch of others.
So we need to be thinking about those things now.
Absolutely. We need to start preparing.
Like how?
Well, we need to think about how to support workers who might lose their jobs.
Okay.
We need to update insurance policies to account for driverless cars.
Right.
And we need to think about the impact on urban planning and social equity.
So it's not just about building robotaxis, it's about building a better future.
Exactly. A future that works for everyone.
And that takes a lot of careful thought and planning.
It does. But I'm optimistic.
Okay.
I think if we do this right, this technology has the potential to really improve things.
Well, we've given our listeners a lot to think about today.
We have.
But before we go, I want to leave them with one final thought. We've talked about the good and the bad.
Yeah.
The technology, the economics, the regulations, the impact on society.
It's a lot.
It is, but ultimately, the future of robotaxis, it's not up to experts or engineers.
Why?
It's up to all of us.
That's a really good point.
So to our listeners, I say, stay informed, stay engaged, and most importantly, stay curious.
Yes.
Ask questions, share your thoughts, be part of the conversation.
That's the only way we'll build a future that works for everyone.
Exactly. The future of robotaxis, it's not something that's just going to happen to us. It's
Wow.
something we're going to create together.
I like that.
So, on that note of empowerment and collective action,
Yeah.
I think we'll wrap up this deep dive.
Sounds good.
Thank you for joining us on this journey into the world of robotaxis.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you enjoyed the ride.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
See you next time.